For a very large number of people, the Witcher series has become one of their all-time favorites over the years. And as I'm sure you've all seen by now, The Witcher is getting its very own Netflix series. And being a huge fan of The Witcher myself, I'm both extremely excited and also a little worried at the same time. So today I figured we'd go over the top 3 things I think the new series needs to get right in order to be successful. At number 3 is good writing. Probably the main thing I'm least worried about, seeing as how Andrei Sapkowski, the author of the novels, is serving as a creative consultant for the new series. And as someone who's experienced both the games and the books, I can definitely say that they're both on par with one another. So if you're someone who's only played the games, trust me when I say this guy knows what he's doing. Obviously, he's not the only one working on this project though. In fact, not in the slightest. There's absolutely room for doubt, especially when you take the time to consider how vast the themes and subject matter in The Witcher tends to be. One moment, Geralt could be deciding the fate of someone's life, and the next he could be having a drink with some of his old mates. Oftentimes, the setting itself can also be an ever-changing one, and in the past has included everything from famine-stricken battlefields to warm, blossoming fields in springtime. So it's important that the show captures both the misery and the joy that the world of The Witcher has to offer. Because nothing in The Witcher is ever black and white, and that's something that the show needs to capture. Another thing that I've come to enjoy about the writing in The Witcher is that there's usually a twist behind almost every story they tell. They can turn a common burglary into a bloodbath between spies, or a joyous fairy tale into a somewhat horrendous nightmare. Examples like these are without question the type of thing I want to see more of in this new series, and are also things that should hopefully keep the show feeling unpredictable. Additionally, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say this show needs a great overall story or conflict, and one that has some actual purpose behind it. Luckily, though I wouldn't say they necessarily have it easy, the writers definitely have a lot to choose from in terms of where they want this series to go, with 3 great games and several excellent books at their disposal. That applies to the characters as well. They should no doubt feel like the ones we've come to know and love, and there's really no need to change any of them to try and appeal to a wider audience. Now, many people may not think of music as being a part of the writing, but to me they clearly go hand in hand. And let's face it, good music doesn't just come out of nowhere. It takes real time and effort to craft something as effective as the soundtracks we've heard in the games and other shows like Game of Thrones. So I'd say not only does the show need to write a score that feels like The Witcher, but it's also gotta be one that's able to highlight both the pleasant and darker moments that the show has to offer. At number 2 is appropriate casting. Without this, you run the risk of disappointing fans, which you could say in this day and age is gonna happen either way. But even more so, with bad casting, you're potentially creating a world that doesn't even feel like The Witcher to begin with. People like Geralt and Yennefer need to feel like they did in the games or the books. Just because they use the same names as the characters doesn't mean fans are gonna see them the same way they did in previous works, especially if they're being portrayed poorly. For example, I think most people could agree that Tom Hanks is a great actor, but let's face it, the guy has no business playing someone like Geralt of Rivia. Characters like Geralt have got to be played by someone who can be serious and at the same time be able to pull off a very witty, dry sense of humor. Honestly, this would have to be the one thing that I'm most nervous about, because when you think about it, they've got to find someone who can both look and act like the characters, which is not an easy task by any stretch of the imagination. And this could be more dependent on the writing, but the characters really need to have a good amount of chemistry and banter between themselves. Very similar to what we've seen in the past with, say, all of the Witchers at Kaer Morhen, or even groups of sorceresses when they end up together. Not only that, but I think the show needs to find dedicated actors who are willing to take this seriously, and ones that don't feel the need to get caught up in several other projects at the same time. Take Keanu Reeves, for instance, and what he's done for the John Wick movies. It's guys like that who really care about their work and make it so that directors and editors don't have to work around them when it comes to things like combat. And I'm going to bring this example up later on because it goes really well with our next category. And yes, I do have plenty of ideas for who I'd want to play certain characters in this show, but that's not really what this video is about. So moving on to number 1, we have great visuals. Even many years later, a lot of the creatures and environments throughout all of the Witcher games still look incredible. And the books also do an excellent job painting a very similar mental picture in your head. But it's one thing to imagine or see these things in the video games, and it's completely different to try and replicate them into a live-action TV series. Definitely not an easy thing to do by any means. That being said, for this to be successful, it can't just settle for lousy CGI or uninspired practical effects. I would say the original Lord of the Rings movies are a great example of the perfect balance. Using makeup was spot on for the orcs, and doing something very similar would work wonders for creatures like drowners, ghouls, and even trolls. Whereas other monsters like wyverns, giants, and griffins will no doubt have to be done with some CGI. For the show's sake, hopefully with a level of quality that can withstand the test of time. Of course, the same applies to the setting as well. Sure, small villages could be built up, but entire cities like Novigrad would have to be done differently. I think the show really needs to nail its own style too, and also in a way that sets it apart from similar shows out there. Once again, it's not going to be easy, especially since The Witcher is a series that makes use of several different styles, some seeming extremely realistic and others are much more fantasy driven. Thankfully, as I mentioned earlier, the show has got a ton of source material to go off of should they need any ideas. Lastly, as we all know, Witchers are obviously made to hunt monsters, so I don't think there's any question that this show is going to feature a lot of combat. But just how good that combat stands to be, though, is still up for debate. Things like the games and even the books managed to pull this off really well, but like everything else we've talked about thus far, getting real actors in there is a whole other story. In this case, there's two ways I see this going, and I really do hope the show takes the latter. Option number 1 would be directors and editors throwing in a ton of cuts and shaky cam moments to sort of hide the fact that the actor doesn't know what he's doing. Or maybe in some cases, poorly made CGI monsters. Doing so unfortunately makes fights tough to follow, and would end up ruining what should be one of the coolest parts about this show. Option number 2, however, would be making sure combat's shown in its fullest, with actors or stuntmen trained to do what they're supposed to, so that people don't have to work around them. Again, I'll bring up Keanu Reeves and John Wick, a movie that had some of the best action scenes that I've watched in ages, mainly because Keanu worked his ass off and knew what the hell he was doing. And that's why 90% of the time it's actually him in those scenes, doing the moves instead of some stuntman that the rest of the crew has to work around. Clearly, these are two completely different genres, but I'd love to see a similar level of dedication in this series, since fighting will most likely play a huge role. But anyways guys, that should do it for today, so please feel free to let me know if you're excited for this new series, and also what you think they'll have to do to be successful. That being said guys, thanks for watching, hopefully you did enjoy the video, and as always I will see you in the next one.